I seem to shout so now I'm so
Right, everyone, we're back on board now. We left yesterday. Yeah. So we worked our way down to item number 6 on our A3 sheet, page 14 in the supplementary report yesterday. So we're dealing now with item 6, which is LED lighting, and that is on page 195 of our agenda book. And Chris, that's you?
Yep.
Is there anything you need to...
Your Worship, if I may, we actually have an updated schedule that shows the changes that have been made to date. So
they can just be passed around?
Yep.
Right, thanks. So, Chris, anything you want to talk about in this?
No, Your Worship, just
report?
to note that the proposition is to put some funding aside for a business case in year 2 for consideration of this, which is quite a major undertaking in the next 10-year plan. So the work we've done shows that it's highly likely to be a positive business case, but there is a lot of work to do.
Right. So this is a request for funding to carry out that detailed work, and then with a view to a discussion about this particular topic at the next 3-year budget review.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, questions for Chris? Anyone got questions on that?
Oh, it's this one here.
I have to say, everyone, we're on page 195 in the agenda booklet. I have to say, when I look at page 196 and the study that was done in 2013, it looks like there are potentially some significant savings that could be, I mean, if that panned out, I mean, that says energy savings estimated to be greater than 50%, and energy costs to run the city are quite significant, aren't they?
They are. There's some tricky negotiations to make sure we understand the linkage between line charges and energy. And
yeah, and also maintenance costs, etc. So there's got the potential to really have some big cost savings for the city, but this business case would be looking at exactly really what does that mean and how what the modelling would show about that.
correct.
Because my understanding is you'd have to, you can't, if you do an incremental rollout, it's not the same. Is that right? The idea is you've got to put all of them in.
We would explore that in the business case,
Right.
but the figures are based on a mass sort of rollout.
Yes.
You might very well get to a point of view where you just do one category roads and not others, but that would be teased out in the business case.
Right.
I think the other thing is LED lighting is just growing in its acceptance nationally
Yeah.
and globally. So it's on a bit of a technology curve, so the time delay will just make sure we're not in an uncomfortable leading edge, I think, but probably still leading if we did something, but
Right.
just in a
Okay.
better space technology-wise.
Yep. Okay. Thanks very much, Councillor Mallett. And I've got Councillor McPherson.
thanks, Chris. This is driven by there's economic drivers behind this, isn't it?
The
No
business
carbon
case is purely
footprint carry
about
on and stuff
saving
like that,
money.
is it?
I think
No
there
carbon footprint carry on.
Sorry, I think
No, this
he's
is-
answering your question, Councillor
Yeah,
Mallett.
Yeah, well, I was
is-
just trying to fulfil my
Yeah, sorry, the business case has got really two parts to it, and the one we've latched onto is about saving money, and just a good financial case, but there are other benefits which we haven't counted in here in terms of road safety because of the quality of light, etc.
Okay.
So for councillors, just if you drive down Bryce Street between Victoria and Anglesey, that's a street that we've put LED lighting in. So just drive down there at night and have a look up and look at the lights and just look at the quality of the lights. They're not the yellow sort of dull lights, they're really
Sorry, what
bright
street
white
did you say?
light. Just
Anglesey?
Bryce Street,
Oh, Bryce Street.
between Victoria and Anglesey. So that is one street that we've trialled, we've put in LED lights. I drove through last night just to have a look, and it is quite spectacular in terms of the quality of light as well. But the business case is just based on the straight economics of energy savings and maintenance cost savings is how we're looking at it.
Right, and to demonstrate to us what kind of savings might happen if we made that investment and when the return on investment date kicks in.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Councillor McPherson,
Yeah, Chris, is there also...
could you speak into your mic, thanks, Councillor McPherson? On mic. thanks.
Excuse me,
Environmental benefit.
I'm just about to switch off. Could you just turn that off?
You've just turned it off? Yes.
Yeah.
Chris heard.
Absolutely, there's a lot of...
I just want to keep Gary happy. See?
Yeah, there are a lot of environmental benefits, sustainability benefits, safety benefits, but I think this is a case which would stack up on the dollars as well.
Yep. Look, the other question was other parts of council that used lighting. We had a discussion yesterday about the expensiveness of lighting on parks and so forth, sports fields and other sorts of parks. And there's other places that council has public lighting that aren't roads. Are you working around the whole council to, if you're looking at getting, say, for instance, a group purchase deal, would other parts of council be able to benefit from that?
Obviously, we'd certainly look at that because one of the big issues is about the scale of purchase. You know, and can we, in fact for us will be, can we jump on the back of Auckland or some other orders? So scale is important. So at the time we would certainly be looking at that.
Even if we have to replace stadium lights, they might be able to be included.
Different type of lighting. Yeah.
Sure, they have an LED version.
So Councillor Pascoe?
Yes, Chris, you touched on bleeding edge being at the forefront. Is it reasonable to assume that the longer we leave it, the potential for the cost to be less and the technology to be better?
Yeah, that was basically what I was saying with the delay for 2 years in doing the business case. That will get better. I think the costs are coming down and the technology will get better.
And second question is, would the business case build in looking at either as an alternative or as an additional advantage using solar energy as part of the LED rollout, or as a backup to the LED rollout?
Yeah, no, interesting enough, we just had a discussion about that yesterday, myself and the transport manager, about including that. We don't think it would stack up, but we would certainly look at that.
Good, thank you.
Right, Councillor Forsyth?
I'd like to move the recommendation when questioning's finished.
Right. Okay, any other, Councillor King?
Chris, the thing you need to take into account when you're looking at the solar side is that there will be no more line costs and there'll be no more maintenance of your cables in and out of the power poles.
Yep,
That's a biggie.
and a great advantage.
So that needs to be considered
Yep.
as part of that study
Right.
Yep.
when it comes to the solar.
Any other questions? No? Okay, so Councillor Forsyth is moving the recommendation on page 14 on the A3 sheet. Up there, seconded by Councillor Pascoe. Is there any debate on this matter? Anyone do you want to speak to it? No? Right, okay, well, we'll go to the board and vote on this. That is the resolution up there. And we're voting.
Vote, Martin.
Yes,
I think that was picked up on the mic, Councillor McPherson.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Right, the next item, thank you. Oh, thank you, Chris. Gone already, great. The next item, now just want to just check with the CFO. I recall yesterday, Paul, that you said down to item 6 were sort of capital items, but now 7, 8, 9 and 10 impact on the operational budgets and therefore the balancing the books.
That's correct, Your Worship, and at this stage, with all the changes that we've made, we have a balancing the books budget surplus in year 1, 2016, of just $121,000. $21,000.
Yes. Okay, so it's very tight on the balancing the books. So that's the first year, 2016.
That's correct.
All right, so...
Can I just and previously that was 25 when we came into this.
That's correct, but you made a change to the fees and charges yesterday that added $96,000 to the bottom line.
Right, okay. All right, so so these items, councillors, have not been included also in the budget, and so I think it's quite important that we understand what the impact would be on the balancing the books measure as we work through these. So, Brian, we've got you for Heritage Fund, and the page number in the agenda is 199.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Morning, councillors. Little report, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. I think you can see by reading it, we're pretty skinny in this area, I've got to say.
Yes.
We haven't done terribly well in supporting funding for heritage in the city. The proposal that's been put up is $200,000 a year for a fund. There's a report going to the next S&P with the draft heritage plan and an implementation schedule, which will give a lot of detail around what the heritage panel have come back with, policy for the city, and guidelines, pretty clear guidelines actually on how that would be implemented and the criteria it would be subject to. I guess the key point to make here is relative to the other metros, we've got nothing in the piggy bank to really assist, and we will be faced with some challenges, I think, in the city when the new earthquake legislation comes through in the next couple of months, and what the implications that may be for our heritage stock. But having said that, that's got to be balanced against the fiscal challenges. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions on this? Councillor Pascoe?
Yes, Brian, you've got on page 200 comparison there with... You've got on page 200 comparison with other larger metros than Hamilton. Have you done the same analysis for other cities such as Palmerston North, New Plymouth, Whangarei, Napier, Nelson, in terms of whether they have heritage funds, and if so, how much they allocate to those?
Pretty much all.
Could you speak into the microphone, thank you?
Virtually all councils in New Zealand have some form of heritage fund or rates relief, etc. We didn't do a too wide a comparison because it's quite difficult, because there's different heritage stock, different sizes of areas.
Agree, yeah. You need to speak into the mic, sorry. So you just need to pull it down closer to you. That's it, that's good, yeah.
Is it on?
I don't think it's working.
Is it on?
Brian's one. Oh, there's a red light at...
It's on.
Check, Roger.
Okay, off you go, thanks.
Sorry, we did have a look around. Majority of councils in New Zealand do have heritage funds of some form, whether that's through rates relief, etc. It's very difficult to compare because we've got different sizes of heritage buildings within New Zealand, we've got different sizes of population. So these are the stock standard metro councils that we normally use as comparison.
So we really are quite unique in the sense that we don't have any sort of fund or any sort of rate relief or any other benefits that might assist in the heritage area.
I think that's the challenge really. There's at least 4 areas where we can give some assistance and direct funding to help with either preparing a heritage plan or construction materials, or the whole range of assistance that can be given. We do have options outside of a funded policy for remitting fees for things. That's an option we have. We could remit development contributions as another lever we have to pull outside of a heritage fund. And there are rate remission options as well. So we've got 3 other sort of financial incentives other than a direct fund to assist. But, we certainly are at odds compared with the other big councils.
Thank you.
So, Brian, just a couple of questions. Okay, a couple of questions just on or they might actually be to the CFO. So I see in the A3 sheet you are saying, well, this would require some money to be found, although the adjustments yesterday mean that's that could be picked up there. Are you suggesting in this, or is it the staff's view that if this was to be picked up, that the community assistance, it could become part of that, a community assistance funding package, and be funded through that fund? Is that what that is saying?
The paper in front of you, Your Worship, was talking about options for removal of another item to make a matching saving.
Right.
But that would be one option, would be to actually combine the funds so that it became a criteria, if you like, of the community assistance funding.
Right, okay. And secondly, the amount, 200,000, so that's, what, is that an amount that's regarded as, you know, appropriate, I guess? I'm looking at, could that be 100,000, or is that just, what's the point kind of thing? You know how there's a threshold that says, well, there's no point in doing it because it's not enough. So where did the 200 come from, or what's sitting behind that?
There's not a lot of science, Your Worship. It was really comparison with the others and putting up a proposal that would be seen as conservative with half a shot.
Right, yes, because looking at the comparisons on page 200, that's significantly under.
Yeah.
Yes, and I understand Dunedin's got lots of other mechanisms because they've got obviously lots of heritage buildings.
Yes, most of the other councils use all of the four levers.
Right, okay. So currently we don't use any.
That's correct.
We don't, nothing.
There's a token amount that sits in one of my budgets to help a little bit with a conservation plan, but it's sort of $20,000, and it's hardly been taken up, I think, because it's probably so insignificant as, you know, in terms of the bigger picture, that it's just not really been used.
Okay, all right, thank you. I've got Councillor Forsyth, then Councillor Mallard.
Thank you.
Oh, Deputy Mayor, sorry, yeah.
Just pursuing the same line of questioning, I think, as Your Worship. So do we have, does anybody apply with the heritage point, I suppose, to any of our other funds? So that can they compete, or can they apply? And I see community assistance here is one that's been targeted, and I was thinking the same thing. If we didn't have a heritage fund, could they apply to another fund, and do they?
Look, they haven't, and I'm not sure that the sort of scope of the funding of the other funds is appropriate for that. But look, I haven't looked at that closely, whether an application for heritage support would fit within the scope of those other funds. But they certainly haven't been promoted that way.
I just, Councillor, I just might check with Lance or Dees here. Do you know if we, because my recollection of the criteria in our other community type funds, you know, it wouldn't be picked up with this sort of thing?
My understanding is no, it's silent whether or not it applies to heritage, but it's mainly around community and recreation type projects.
Yeah.
The draft policy, Your Worship, that's coming to S&P talks about any fund only being available to the private landowner. So if there was any community groups or Crown ownership or you know, any other institutional land ownership, wouldn't apply. It's just the private landowner.
Right, okay. Okay, Councillor Mallett?
Thank you. On page 200, you've got the comparison with the other cities. The Heritage Fund for Auckland, for example, is 940. Is that the value of the fund at a current point in time, or is that the annual contribution, that's the annual amount they put into it?
Yeah, that's the annual amount.
That's the annual amount, okay. So do you know what their funds are?
Beg your pardon?
Do you know what the fund is?
What do you mean? Total.
What's the total? What's the balance in the account for those cities?
How much has been spent?
No, how much does Auckland have in their fund? They put in $900,000 a year, $940,000 a year. How much do they spend? So is it going up or down, or is that how much they...
I'm not sure. We haven't made that level of comparison. We were just going for a high-level comparison, what other councils had in their heritage funds.
So I guess I'm trying to get some sort of idea of how much actually gets used.
Can I ask a question just also for clarity? That 940,000 is what they budget allocate every year. If it's unspent, does that get carried forward to the next year?
No, we haven't looked at that. We just did a quick comparison of what was in their budgeted funds.
So I guess what they allocate's not so important. It's what they actually spend. That is the better comparison. Shows you how much support they're providing or what the need is.
Yeah,
I mean, their budget allocations might be wildly under or wildly over.
Yeah, I guess every city's different, though, and have different heritage demands and how active the heritage communities are. It's just a relative comparison of how we sit compared to the other bigger cities.
Deputy Mayor, your Deputy Mayor and Member Councillor is also chair of the advisory group, the Heritage Advisory Group, and Councillor Gallagher also sits on that.
Look, I just wanted to ask a question and then also signal to you about a recommendation, because I would like to speak to the recommendation. Were you aware that Waipa, for example, allocates about $70,000 a year?
Yes.
It gives a comparison of a small community compared to the larger centres that you've identified.
Okay,
So when you are ready, I'm happy to signal
right.
a resolution.
So what I might do is finish off questions and then I'll come back to you. Councillor McPherson?
Yes, don't want to question the actual idea of the fund, but management's idea of where the funds for it might come from. The proposition in the spreadsheet is that it could come from the Community Assistance Fund, which we've briefly discussed before. I'm not sure whether management or you as managers are aware that currently that's only available for non-profit groups, not for the private sector, and has a maximum of $5,000 per grant. I don't think that's going to get you very much in the heritage area. I can't see why you think it's appropriate that even be mentioned as a possibility. And it sort of sets two elements in the community against each other almost.
Brian, I think I was just saying to the CFO, do you want to just clarify, because the difference between capital and operational, I think, is kicking in here.
That's right. And we were looking for something that was discretionary within council's budget that could match that cost.
An operating budget.
Within the operating budget. So
why did you pick that?
Because we have very little that is actually discretionary within the budgets left.
So isn't that trying to set it up for set up a big argument in council between a couple of areas?
No, we were trying to work a way that could give council a choice. We were not trying to set up an argument. We were trying to find a choice for council to make it.
Isn't another choice that it could come out of the operational savings yet to be identified by the CEO in the review, out of salaries over a period of time, things like that? I mean, why is this the only option that's come forward?
So I think
I'm questioning the appropriateness of that.
What you're raising is, yeah, sure. I mean, the council here could make a resolution that says something different. I think you've asked your question and he's answered it. And
I guess
it's up to us what we direct.
True, Your Worship, but I guess what I'm leading to is I would have liked to have heard some options, a wider range of options than just that one, which either sense people who like the Community Assistance Fund don't want to touch this because of that, and they're not actually necessarily mutually exclusive if other options for funding have been put forward.
We did have to look for items that were within the first year, because this was a proposal across all 10 years. And we also had to look at ones that could be implemented immediately. So, for example, if we decided that it was going to come out of an efficiency saving that resulted from a position being removed or something like that, we would have potential redundancies that would cancel out that impact in the first year, and therefore we had to actually find something that was a discretionary expenditure of council that actually was going to have an impact in the first year and was discreet enough that we could actually put it up as an option.
So hammer 120 little community groups in order to set this fund up is the proposition from management, it seems to me.
All right, so that's a comment. So have you got any other questions, Councillor McPherson?
No, thanks.
Well, just a question to the CEO. Obviously, you can appreciate people like myself are very minded to be very supportive of what I think the Deputy Mayor is going to put up. But I can't go there if there's any risk that the community groups that Councillor McPherson alluded to are going to be hammered, because that's going to be a consequence. I'm just trying to work out whether, for example, one option is to have it in year 2, so that you guys have got a year to sort out your, the overs and unders. I'm just trying to get a direction, because I'm certainly very supportive of what I think the Deputy Mayor is going to put up. But I have to be crystal clear, it's not going to be at a certain consequence in another area of the community.
So is it that's sort of a comment, actually, Councillor Gallagher. So why don't we hear what the Deputy Mayor's proposal is
Right.
and hear from the CFO about funding input.
Sure.
Would that help?
Fine, yep.
Okay, let's go to the Deputy Mayor. What are you going to propose?
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. Look, my intention would be to move that the Heritage Fund be funded as from 2017
Right.
at $100,000 a year within the 10-year plan period.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Could I ask a question on that of the Deputy Mayor,
Yep.
just in relation to the identified surpluses explained by Paul for this year, whether the Deputy Mayor's considered starting it this year using that 121, was it? That's
Okay, the
currently-
Deputy Mayor, you've elected 17
Yeah, look,
rather than 16.
I appreciate how tight the discussion has been for the next 10 years. So originally I was coming into this chamber to argue for the full 200,000 right now. But I think it's prudent to consider the achieving of a surplus and to have, rather than lose it entirely, I would rather make compromises, including the level of money and the start time,
Okay.
rather than eat into the surplus.
So, it's a good question and good, helpful answer, actually. So, CFO, can you just, is that a more palatable approach from your perspective?
Yes, that would be a more palatable approach. That would make a difference in the surpluses from 2017 forward. It would also reduce in our constraining year around the debt to revenue target in 2021, which if you have a look at your sheet, in the third line of figures, there has effectively a favourable amount of $1.2 million available. By the time we take into account the debt impact and the interest cost of that, we'd probably be moving that down to around about $500,000, and we're just checking that on the model.
Right.
So that constraining year, we would be using up most of that amount that's available in the debt ratio.
So can I just also then clarify, so that would mean then that it can be funded, if it starts in 2017, there's no adjustments required on community assistance funding or anything? That can
That's
be,
correct.
Yeah, so that answers your point, I think, Councillor Gallagher, that in fact it doesn't need any operational budget adjustment if it starts in 2017.
Your
I
Worship.
totally see where Deputy
Yeah,
Mayor's
then I'll
coming
come to
from
you.
now.
Sorry, did you, what? Did
No,
you,
no, I mean, I think
Right.
that's...
I was just going to ask, through you to the General Manager, if the issues of things like rates remission and the other non-budgetary items are going to be covered in the policy coming up to S&P shortly, or
Right.
whether we need to address them now.
Yeah, they do need to be addressed. That's a very good point, because we don't have that direction at the moment to use those other levers. So I'm not sure we could do that through maybe steer through S&P when the report goes up, because it would. I'm not sure exactly the right channel for it to come back to council.
I'm noticing that in the report here, but it's not going to be covered either way at the moment.
So the status at the moment is that the Deputy Mayor's advisory group has been working through with a group of skilled people from the community. This policy, we've not, we've had a workshop on it, but we certainly haven't seen any of the details. This will be our first opportunity. So I'm imagining, Deputy Mayor, there's still some discussion to go through on that policy before it's bedded down. Is that the time to have a discussion about what other mechanisms might flow, or
Well,
is the policy generally generic?
draft policy is due to come to the committee shortly. And I agree that there are issues around fee waiver and rates remission. And when I speak to the resolution, I have some updated contemporary information that will talk about an issue that's arising right now. But one of the big things to consider is that the Heritage Fund, if agreed, is for the listed properties. So I'm not anticipating a flood of applications for this from buildings that are old, probably would be considered heritage, but there has to be a case put up for the listing. So this is about less than 120 buildings in the city, some of which we own, some of which is in church ownership, other private ownership. So it's a mixed bag of ownership option.
All right, so
some don't pay rates.
Okay, so in response to Councillor McPherson's issue, I think, should we get the policy through to S&P, have a look at it, because we're still within the window of discussions for the budget.
I'm just wondering if we can ensure that management will address that issue, at least highlight it in their report
I think
to
he said
S&P.
he was going to do that, yeah.
Thank
Now,
you.
CFO, you just had a comment?
Yep, we have now run the model to check the figures, and the constraint in 2021 would be $432,000 now left in the between the debt target and the total overall debt.
What year, sorry, are we looking
This
at?
is in 2021, where it currently reads 1.2 million. That would become 432, and in year 10, it's around about $78 million.
I've got heaps of plans.
All right, so I've got Councillor Pascoe, then Councillor Mallet on questions.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, with the consent of the Deputy Mayor and Councillor O'Leary, that perhaps the motion be slightly reworded, that a heritage fund be established and be funded. And that way it kind of covers the situation that we're kind of sitting in limbo without having a heritage fund.
I mean, that sounds... Councillor O'Leary, you got any problem with those words? No, that's fine, okay. Councillor Mallet?
Just wonder if we could go back into a little bit of context. The Heritage Funds comes about because we have a thing called heritage buildings. Just remind me, Brian, how does that building become a heritage building?
But, yeah, it's
Oh,
old.
falling down.
But there's different classifications, if you like.
Who determines whether it's a heritage building or not? Rather than going through the...
It's a professional heritage assessment, so it's quite subject to a lot of detailed criteria.
So people apply to have their building made a heritage?
Generally they do. So what happens is the application's made, is then listed in the district plan under the heritage building section of the district plan. Excuse me, so that means it goes through the RMA test and challenge to make sure it's appropriate to be protected in there. So under the district plan at the moment, about 137 heritage buildings. That's in the schedule, what's called Schedule 8A. And then there's Schedule 8B, which also covers archaeological and cultural matters of significance. So there's two different ones. This one's focused on the heritage buildings. So for, in comparison generally, we're pretty modest in terms of what's covered. And one of the signals coming out from the heritage panel that Deputy Mayor's working on, and that group has really been set up to have a much higher profile in terms of how the city's managing its historic building stock. So you'll need to get through that process. Then the proposed policy that's going up for S&P to consider, it's got some quite detailed criteria about any application for assistance, how it would be assessed. So that does go into a lot of detail.
Okay, so when the owner of a building doesn't want it to be heritage, what happens?
Well, the process would be, generally speaking, it wouldn't progress. If, however, like one scenario would be there was a very strong advocacy group within the city that wanted a building to proceed, to be listed in the plan, and the owner didn't want it. So that would be like the most likely scenario.
Temple View.
It would come to council basically, and we'd bring a report here and say, here's the proposal. Do you want to proceed to a change to the district plan to include this building on the heritage schedule? So the first debate would be around the council table. If the council collectively decided to go ahead, then it would be tested through the RMA process.
And of course that couldn't happen until unless the owner was in agreement. That's correct, isn't it?
Well, not necessarily.
Not
no.
necessarily.
And it's a little bit like the RMA, for example. You could apply for a nuclear power station on my property, and without my consent.
Not like that at all, really. It's an existing building that's
Well,
by definition has been there for a long time, so we're not talking about a nuclear power plant next door, Brian.
I'm answering your question.
No,
which
you're not.
is
You're
the-
talking about
Yeah,
nuclear
so
power
Councillor,
plants.
so Councillor Mallet...
Well,
No,
the manager is going way off track and trying to throw little straw men
with
out
respect, Councillor Mallet, sometimes, your request for information, we've actually been through, as you know, detailed presentation.
No,
of
with
the
respect,
process.
I have asked the
No.
manager before about this, and I've never had a direct answer. I've never had a straight answer, please, and I'm
Well,
trying
I
to achieve that now.
Well, my recollection, Councillor Mount, is you were present when we had a lengthy and detailed discussion and presentation by staff of the process to go through to get heritage buildings on, which is set by legislation. So if you ask your question, let them answer. If you don't like the answer, wait and then go on again. All
Okay,
right.
can we just clarify things? I'm not interested in nuclear power plants. I'm not talking about nuclear power plants, so I'm okay with that.
So under the Resource Management Act, which the scheduling process is controlled by, anyone can effectively apply for a consent for just about anything. You don't need the owner's permission to do that. What you do need, though, is the owner's permission to give effect to the consent if it was granted. So that's the legal principle that applies.
So we've got situations where people own a building and then some people would call them busybodies, others would call them great little citizens, decide that has heritage value even though I don't own it, I don't have any input into its costs, and people can just apply to have your building made a heritage. It goes through this process, and there is no, the owner has no right of veto.
Well, no, not exactly. It's as I explained. The first, if a group, for example, wanted to promote a protection of a heritage building, and the owner wasn't inclined that way, it would come to the council, and the council would make the first decision whether it progressed through the RMA process.
And just, Brian, RMA process means a formal hearing and public notification.
Yes, that's right.
And the owner of the building is the first person notified?
Yes, and they'd be able to challenge.
So they're told that their house is going to be made
Well,
heritage.
I'm just outlining what the Act says. It doesn't mean I necessarily agree with it, but that's what the legislation is for the country we live in.
So the government's given us that legislation, you're just telling us the process the government has
That's the
set.
process we go through. So there's sort of two steps. One is a governance decision, should it proceed or not, and then if you decide collectively that it had a sufficient merit, even though the owner didn't agree with it, then you would have to go through the formal RMA process, which would involve a hearing and a challenge and probably an Environment Court appeal. So
And
that's the process.
just to be clear, just to get an answer, in some situations, an unwilling owner could be forced into to have the categorization of his or her property. He could have a heritage classification imposed on his property.
If at the end of that whole process I've just described and the challenges that went with that, if that was upheld, that would be the outcome. How likely that is.
So what we're getting here is an intended consequence of what I consider to be a totally dictatorial.
Sorry, question?
I'm asking.
Yeah, what's
so-
your question on the fund? What is it?
Yeah,
What is it? Go for
if
it.
you hadn't interrupted, I would have finished
Well,
it by now.
it's good
So
to have it out, isn't
the intended consequence of this legislation is we now have to start funding people to keep their houses up to scratch in order to maintain a categorisation they had no desire to do. So we're in a situation where an unwilling owner is forced into he's gone through this lovely process. He's now been told, righto mate, yours is now a heritage property. You have to maintain it to this quality. There's certain things you can and can't do to it. But because of that, here's some money for you.
Well,
Well, sorry.
Yes.
It's pretty simple, isn't it?
No. So, Councillor Mallet, we can choose not to do this. So
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm asking.
Let
Yeah.
me finish. The answer is the decision is up to us. To date, we haven't. And that's very
And
obvious
that's
in the
exactly
report.
what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, so the answer to your question, you don't need to ask him because you know the answer.
No, I don't know the answer. I'm
We're
trying to get a
deciding
clear answer here.
today if we want to do that or not. And if you don't want to do it, well, you can say so.
No, I'm trying to find out the cause and effect here, okay? The reason that this has arrived is because of our heritage policy.
No, the reason why this has arrived, because there was a political request to bring a proposal for funding to the LTP, and that's what's been done. So the council can collectively debate the merits of it, and that's what's happening at the moment.
Right, Councillor McPherson.
Thanks. I suspect I'm unlikely to agree with Councillor Mallet on some of the heritage outcomes he and I might think are worthwhile, but talking about that, the process that you just outlined, I want to just give you a scenario that, a real scenario, actually happened to me in the neighbouring council, where my house was listed as a heritage category B in their district plan. I was never notified, found out, I mean, if I had read chapter and verse all 778 pages, I may have found it in there, probably would have, but being an ordinary citizen in that jurisdiction, I didn't. I was never notified or asked, and the only time I found out about it was after the whole box and dice was finished.
So what's your question?
I'm just about to ask that, Your Worship. Could that happen here? Could we list something? I mean, that was something that the council initiated. So that's where I'm coming from.
So the
can the
question is,
council initiate something?
Can we do that?
Well, I'd like to say no, and certainly it would not be the intention, but I can't categorically say that. But
so is there a part in the process, Brian, I guess where I'm coming from, where the moment a private property is mentioned as a potential or a draft heritage classification, the owner gets notified because that's our process?
Yes. So I'll double check that's the case. I'm pretty sure it is, but that's exactly what the expectation would be. And, you know, my experience with this is very few things would progress if the owner was adamantly opposed to it. So, but if, for example, there was a strong lobby that sought that, it would have to come through the council channel in the first case, and then through all the drama of the RMA in the second case.
Yes, I understand that part, but it's the notification of the warning, if you like, of the opportunity.
Okay, so Deputy Mayor, I'm going to you to speak to your motion.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, we've got another question, Councillor King. So it's a question on what we're actually talking about here, which is a fund. Is that what the question's about? This matter?
Yeah.
Okay, because, you know, I mean, all the discussion about heritage building, interesting, but this is about this fund. So if it's a question about that, go for it.
Brian, it clearly says here that the fund is only for building owners to make an application to restore or to do something to their own property. So no other parties, apart from the building owner, can come in and make a application for funding. So the whole $100,000 we're talking about is set aside for building owners and no other parties.
Yes, that's what the draft policy says at the moment. So that the draft policy has been prepared by the panel that we've discussed. It's to come to strategy and policy at its next meeting, and council will then decide the comfort level with what's in that policy and direct any changes to it. So the policy, what it ends up looking like, and any guidance material that around it is still to come through the council process.
The information we've been given that we're voting on says the Heritage Fund creates an economic incentive for building owners. And we're voting on that, so I expect that when the policy does come through, it clearly states that it's only for building owners.
That's what the
because
draft...
that's what this says, and this is what we're voting on, setting the money aside for.
That's correct, and that's what the draft policy says, and that's where the wording has come from. However, council can change that however you want. So at this point in time, that's correct, but it's subject to what evolves out of the Strategy and Policy Committee and ultimately what's adopted by council.
So there's no certainty that what we're voting on is going to be what we get?
Well, I can't give you certainty on what the decision of Strategy and Policy Committee is going to be.
Look, sorry. This is a proposal to establish a heritage fund for building owners. That's right. That's what it is.
That's correct.
So I think the answer to your question, Councillor King, is yes. That is what we're voting on. Now, the General Manager then went on to say, which I guess was not part of your question, is If we wanted to change that in the future, we could, but we are voting on establishing a heritage fund for building owners, and that's what it says in this report. So I'm with you. It was a good question, and that's what I understand. All of us understand we're voting on.
Thank you.
Councillor Mount, did you have
Yeah,
a question?
so just expanding on what Andrew was saying then, this money could then, so council says that something has to be done to this heritage building. Against the owner's will, could you then could you then just go in there and start building an extra bedroom or whatever it is that the heritage jury says that has to be done to the house? The property may or may not be a house.
With this fund?
Yeah.
Well, no.
Well, who determines what gets spent on? Just putting this in context, these things have now been taken out of the private property category where you're supposed to have a few rights into a thing called heritage property, which means the community decides what we do with these properties.
But it says building owners.
Pardon?
It says it's a fund for building owners.
The building owners are losing their right to do anything with their properties.
All right.
So whether or not the building owner agrees with it or not, if the heritage jury decides that something needs to be done on a property, this money could be used for that also. Whether or not, and we've already heard that the owner may or may not approve of this, because he may or may not have approved of becoming a heritage at all.
No, the gentleman is going to answer that question,
Well,
which I'm
I'll
sure
try
is
to-
one syllable.
I'll try to answer it.
I think it's a yes-no question.
You'd
Well,
like
it's-
to say no?
Well, I think it is a yes-no question. It is. Can someone who doesn't own the building use this fund?
Not
Well,
under,
someone would be the city council.
not under the draft policy.
Right. No.
Just a quick one. To me, this new heritage fund is more or less like the community assistance fund. So you're going to set up like a heritage funding policy, the criteria, process, how to administer the fund. So that involves staff time and all other expenses, and all those will be covered within your budget. Or?
Correct, and that's what will be coming to strategy and policy.
And there will be like an allocation committee, and then you have meetings, allocate the fund.
Yeah, there's a process for the assessment of any application and the application process.
So have you estimated roughly the cost of those? Like, yeah, staff time and...
No, not in that level of detail.
Right. Do you have any more?
I can now speak to the
You can,
resolution.
yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship. I really understand the issues here, and in particular, Councillor Mallett's issue over property rights, because that is one of the dilemmas in New Zealand about the right of the property owner. I think over the years, Hamilton has a very poor record in terms of securing its heritage values. And we've lost many important buildings because they've come down, there's been no protection, and they haven't been listed, and the property owner has the right to take down, clearly, an unlisted building. I always mention the value of what Wintec did at the corner site. 1924 building, it had to be earthquake strengthened. Government provided $600,000 for the strengthening. But Wintec made the decision it was better to secure the Wintec history and Hamilton history for probably the same cost as a new build. And I think any of us who've been at Wintec events over there will agree that that is a wonderful use of education money to secure a heritage value for Hamilton. Over the last 8 or 9 months, Martin and I and a panel of experts have worked hard on producing a draft policy that you are yet to see, which includes a very important process under an incentive scheme. Now, that panel has included people associated with Heritage New Zealand, New Zealand architects involved in Christchurch, Dr. Anne McEwen as an example. And Martin and I have been pleased to work with these people who are absolute experts and understand the heritage funds from all around New Zealand, which is why we've argued that at the moment we're doing nothing and we do need to take a serious step forward. And certainly I believe our heritage record is poor compared to other cities, and I mentioned previously Waipa District Council putting in $70,000. And we've got to start from somewhere, and that's why I was prepared to make the compromise, understanding the difficulties of the 10-year plan and bringing down the 200 to 100 because it is a start. Now, in terms of property rights, we look at Euphrasie House and Clyde Street, a very important building and a listed building. Now, the owners wanted to demolish. There was a community group that said no, and I agreed with that community group. However, through the process, the Catholic Church was able to argue that it should come down. Now, the cost between a new build and restoring the heritage building was $1 million. And you could argue, yes, well, that's imposing a penalty of $1 million on the church. So we're about to lose that building. Now, the more current one that I bring council's attention to is the Methodist Church in Grey Street. Now, it was not listed, so the owner had the right, by getting a resource consent and banging it over. But I wished that they had come to us and said, look, do you know anyone who want to have this building for $1 and remove it? Now, I believe, and I make the concession, that I'd rather move a building than lose it to demolition. But we didn't get that opportunity, which then immediately raised the issue around St Paul's Methodist Church, a 107-year-old church in London Street, which is a Category 2 listed building. And here's the predicament that Councillor Mallett talks about, the right of the property owner. They're sitting on a very valuable commercial site that borders both Victoria Street and London Street. And when we raised the issue of this church because of the earlier Methodist Church removal, the church trustees agreed quite recently that they would be prepared to give the church away for $1 for removal, because that allows them to unlock their commercial benefits from a valuable section and also allow us to extract some rates from a commercial development. Now, as a result of that publicity, the Waikato Waldorf School in the northeast of the city have talked with the church, who is prepared to sell it to them for $1 for them to remove it. Now, that sounds a win-win. I'm delighted with that.
Move an extension, Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you,
I'll second.
Councillor. The issue now is that the church has got to prove to council to get a resource consent to remove it, and they've got to go through the hoops over the economic benefits and the earthquake strengthening and so on. So that imposes a penalty cost on the church. Now, Waikato Waldorf School, which is largely run by volunteers, has now got to find some money to then go through its resource consent to move the church, pay the cost of the removal, which is going to be, $100,000, another $70,000 for meeting earthquake restrictions. And what a great outcome for the northeast of the city to have a hall that not only will have school use, but will be available to community groups, including St Anne's Anglican Church. So there's a win-win, but we impose all of these regulations. I mention that only to say, well, here's a case where a heritage fund will not pass over $100,000 to the church and the school, but it would give them the right to apply for professional advice. It might be a $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 contribution to save an important piece of heritage in the city, not on the site, but for the city. So I use that argument as how that incentive fund might be used. No one will get $100,000 out of the fund. It'll be, and when it comes to council, you will see that there will be some restrictions around the size and for what particular purpose, such as engineering reports, Heritage New Zealand reports and so on. And I think this is a great outcome for the city, and I urge councillors to take the opportunity to put the line in the sand so we can move forward and show that we do care about heritage. And remember, the final point I just want to make, this is about listed buildings. And I do not support Joe Blow coming along and saying the tree on Councillor Mallett's property is a heritage tree and he must not even prune it. That is absolutely wrong. And I disagree with what's happened to Councillor McPherson's property. It's a lovely property and it's one of the finer homes in Ngaruawahia, made famous by being the residence of long-standing Hamilton City Councillor. There should be a process that you don't grab the property, but that the owner is advised that there is a process around it. We only have 400 odd trees listed as heritage trees in Hamilton, for example, and I advocate that if you've got a heritage tree on your property, that you should come into council and talk to our horticultural people and establish whether it's got value or it's just a nice old tree. So with that, councillors, I would urge you to support the $100,000 incentive fund starting in 2017, and thank you.
Councillor Leary.
I'll keep mine a lot shorter than that, but support the Deputy Mayor's motion. We are out of step with government when it comes to Heritage Fund and protecting heritage buildings, and with, as the Deputy Mayor's already pointed out, other TLAs. This gives us, funded from 2017, gives us time to finish the policy and also to wait for the outcome of the government's earthquake-prone buildings bill, because that's going to have some significant impact. Councillor Mallett talked about private ownership, but it's my belief that whether a heritage building is in private ownership or not, that the residents of any city in our country don't like to see history demolished or pulled down, especially when it's in the dark of night. And so I'm very comfortable that the ratepayers of our city will happily support $100,000 per annum starting from 2017.
Okay, anyone else for or against? Councillor Gallagher?
Yes, obviously now you've removed the tag.
Could you turn yourself on, thanks, Councillor Gallagher?
Now you've removed the tag of the community assistance. I would be strongly supporting this, and I totally applaud the contribution that the Deputy Mayor's just made, and also acknowledge publicly his expertise and initiative behind the scenes in a lot of areas. And the Methodist London Street discussions is a good example where very good people in terms of governance and community people get together and work through an outcome. And with respect, that's a total contrast to the middle of the night tragic destruction of a building adjacent to Steel Park, when there might have been some other alternatives. So I think it's also wanting to move where we encourage good community-minded behaviours around dialogue, and where property owners come to us and say, look, I have a problem, and I think Councillor Chesterman's highlighted that. Obviously, we are losing significant heritage, and have lost, obviously the eventual outcome with regard to Euphrates House, in my personal view, is an awful tragedy. And you just wonder, we can do so much, and yet surely there was a way in which the community and the council, the government and the Catholic Church that could have worked together to have saved that building, and over time even closed the monetary gap. To me, the star in the city is Wintec, where you have an amazing blend on their campus of heritage and contemporary. And Mark Flowers, the chief executive there, and his board, including, of course, former chair Gordon Chesterman, should be given every accolade and award we can think of, because they have shown initiative in great contrast to other organisations, and what a legacy they have left for that campus. The jury is out on Temple View. We will see what the final outcome, but obviously a number of us are very sad that a heritage aspect is now gone from that area. What has happened in Hamilton East over the years, if I could track from way back in 1970, don't want to give a long historic lecture, you know, with the Royal Hotel was replaced by an East Side Tavern. The wall on the corner of Clyde Street, Grey Street was destructed at 4 in the morning, or was it, sorry, 6 in the morning, not sure when. Tragic, just tragic. So in summary, I see this fund as but a very small step in wanting to sort of join the other links, and that relates to good urban design, design panel, strong heritage encouragements of which this fund is part, the Hamilton East, Frankton heritage zones, Claudelands, and encouraging good urban streetscape, etc., and even relating it to the river plan. I think this is part of a jigsaw puzzle to try and make Hamilton a nicer, lovelier place, and to perhaps arrest some of the sad destruction that we've witnessed over the years. And just finally, look at Dunedin. In Auckland, 1.5 million. If we had a similar, so we're matching Auckland, you know, they're equivalent to our population, 94,000, if a tenth of that. Dunedin, a smaller population than us, obviously have huge commitment, and I and others have been around their heritage sites, and what an incredible council, what an incredible community, what an incredible private sector in Dunedin who have got it, that actually in a number of cases doing redos of existing heritage buildings makes sense commercially, but they're there with it in a partnership with their council and other organisations. So I strongly support this motion as a beginning, a cautious beginning, and also want to place on public record that in this case I do give praise to the Deputy Mayor, because his leadership, in my view, in this area has been outstanding. And that is not a praise, as you know, that I give lightly to a colleague elected member.
Are any other speakers? Councillor Pascoe?
Just one point of clarification from the CFO. I take it that the fund is not an accumulating fund, it's a use it or lose it on an annual basis, and that the 100,000 doesn't roll over into, or unspent value of the 100,000 doesn't roll over. Just the fact that it's called a fund just adds a little bit of confusion to that understanding.
Why do you take it that it's not accumulating? I don't understand the...
Well, my understanding is it's a use it or lose it.
Let's just be clear, what is it?
Yeah.
We have assumed that it will be spent in the year that is allowed, particularly at a low level like $100,000 or $200,000, but that would depend on the final council policy in relation to this fund.
Just a question, so what does that proposal say then?
Effectively, that's asking us to include in the budget a $100,000 allowance per annum from 2017. So it does not say that it has to be spent. That would be defined by the policy when that is finalised.
I don't know what we normally do in these situations, but what Rob's trying to get at is if 80,000 is spent one year, do we only put 80,000 in the next year, I assume? Do we top it up to 100 in any one year, or is it...
So Councillor Mallett, in the last few years we've been very focused on not doing that in funds that we have. Not doing that, because of course those aspects come to us for us to make decisions about those things that you call carryovers when we look at the deferred capital, and we make those decisions at the time, and we haven't been carrying things over. For example, the public art fund, which historically used to always be carried over. So my view is that that wording is sufficient, but what we have to make sure is two things. No inflation's added to it each year. It is 100,000 full stop. And number two, that if it's not spent in a year, that's as a matter of normal reporting comes to us for our budget final wash up in the year, and we make the decision. It is what it is, because that's what that means. It's 100,000
every year.
Okay, so is there anyone else? Yes, do you
just very quickly.
Yes.
I'd like to speak in support of the motion, and just to apply a different perspective. I think this is more than bricks and mortar. This is about our identity as a city. It's about where we've come from, where we're at, and where we're going. And I think our forebears, foremothers and forefathers that toiled and lived their lives in the past. They may not be able to speak to us of those stories, but the legacy that they have left in the form of a building, albeit, or a tree in some regards, I think of Steel Park, those are things that we can see, that our young can see today and into the future, and it's a really important thing to honour and to preserve. So I'm totally supportive of this. And the motion in my mind says per annum. That means each year.
Right. Anyone else? Thank you. Okay, so we're going to vote on that, and we're going to vote using the board.
Oh, shit. Sorry, I pushed the wrong one. Shivers.
Shivers, right. I must have misunderstood you.
It's carried 9 votes for, 2 against.
Thank you. Thank you. The next item is recycling options. So, councillors, just remember we're going to pick up wheelie bins. We're not going to discuss wheelie bins here. We're picking that up after we've finished this list. So, Chris, this is proposed on page 220 in relation to improvements to the refuse or the rubbish tip and some recycling things around the city. So is there anything you wanted to pick up for us, or?
So probably just to reinforce your work, the recommendation in front of you is that this project at number 8 remains unaffordable against some of the other higher priorities. Our proposal would be to test some of the values of these 2 things through the procurement of our waste contract, so we can test the value again of the modifications to the refuse transfer station and the drop-off points through that procurement process, and develop that through the next
So when just remind me again, when will you be starting that procurement process?
At this point in time, the contract expires, that we would need to have a new contract in place by 1 July 2017.
Right. So over the next...
we really need to start thinking about the procurement from about now, actually. It's a very complicated project, so we'll be starting to develop that over the next 12 months.
Right, so this is currently unfunded, and your recommendation is to keep it unfunded and use that procurement process to test some of these ideas in relation to the way we deal with rubbish and recycling, see what comes out in time for any adjustments in the next 3-year budgeting process?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So, councillors, are there any councillors who wish to explore putting this as a funded item? Because if there aren't, we just end it here and not go through a process of questions, etc. No? Because we don't need to do actually anything.
Yeah.
It just, we do.
The only thing is, Your Worship, I wouldn't like to see it lost, but I guess if it continues to be listed as unfunded, then it's sitting up there to be seen. Is that, the issue for further subsequent debate?
So I think that the thing here is that, number one, it's on your radar, and number 2, are you saying in terms of visibility for the public?
Yes, if someone wishes to make a submission on it, the issue is outlined in the document, that sort of thing.
We will reference it in the document
okay.
appropriately. And also, as Chris's point is, it's on his work program to test the validity of it anyway. So from a staff point of view, Chris has got an action to follow that through, and I'm sure at some stage he'll revert back to council with the success or otherwise of that testing in terms of whether it does stack up going forward.
Thanks.
Okay, so Chris, no, we finished with that one then. Thanks. That was quick. Regional Tourism Office funding. So again, councillors, this is not funded, and this is on page 224. And the recommendation on the A3 sheet is for it to remain unfunded.
Just to be clear, is it the increase we're talking about, or is it the...
Yes, I
Is it
think
the
it
increase
is.
you're talking
increase.
Yes.
There is an amount already in the budget for what is currently being funded. This is an increase above that.
So it's currently 390, and the thing that your worship is suggesting being unfunded and not funded is the 195.
So currently in the budget is 390 a year.
Yeah.
This is a proposal to increase that amount, and currently that increased amount is not in the budget. So again, I guess the same process. If there's no flavour at all to even discuss it, but I've got a question from the Deputy Mayor, then I'll go to you.
Yes, look, I just had a question relating to the signal that this decision, if made, might send in relation to the other councils, because my understanding is that Tourism Waikato / Hamilton has gone to all the other contributing councils and asked for an increase. I'd be interested to know what the other councils have done so far, or are they waiting on what Hamilton decides? Because surely the issue would be quite similar for all the other councillors in terms of type budget. So do we know what
So have
impact?
you got an answer on that? Do you know what?
Yes, Your Worship. My understanding is that you are absolutely correct, Councillor Chesterman, that the other councils have been waiting for a signal from Hamilton. Bearing in mind we are the 50% funder of the organisation, and the ask for increased funding is the largest to us. My understanding is that, and it's just my understanding, that through the various LTP processes underway, 2 councils have said yes to increased funding, 2 have said no, and 2 remain undecided. And
So who are they, if you could tell us who they are?
Waipa District Council, no. Waikato District Council, yes. Matamata Piako District Council, no. South Waikato District Council, yes. So that leaves Otaronga District Council and Waitomo District Council with a question mark that are undecided.
So the major tourism areas are mixed then, yes and
Matamata.
Matamata's a no.
There's some tourist things there, isn't there?
Hobbiton.
Oh, that's right, yes. Oh, they're not going to fund it. Oh, okay.
I think
they want us to.
Deputy Mayors.
Oh, well, this is, remember, they have separate fundings for all that. This is about the regional funding.
Just to...
So wait a minute, we're
Sure.
still, so Deputy Mayor, does that answer your question? Right, and then I had Councillor McPherson. Councillor McPherson, you got some questions?
Yeah, it was partly the Deputy Mayor's question, but also my understanding was this was something that was run by the Mayoral Forum, correct me if I'm wrong, and there was, I don't know, support or endorsement for it to go forward. Tell me...
I'm not aware that I haven't participated in a Mayoral Forum meeting on this, but I think they did, I think she did go and speak to members of the Mayoral Forum, but we weren't there.
Okay.
Yeah, so no, I've had no...
So I just believe she said that in the briefing to us, or someone said it to us.
No, I wasn't there.
I actually support the proposition, not necessarily the amount, but the proposition for increased funding, because I don't think I think they've been relatively successful with a low level of funding relative to other regions. I've seen what some of the others have done. I think I would have liked to have seen perhaps the Mayoral Forum come up with a joint proposal from them rather than from outside for a lower level or a staged funding increase that was manageable by councils over the years as an alternative to just this much bigger extra amount. And I'm wondering if...
Was the Mayoral Forum talked about? I mean, I don't know. What
well, sorry, I'm not trying to... I'm not really worried about what has or hasn't happened in the past. I'm thinking going forward, sorry.
Perhaps, Your Worship, if I could just respond to that. My understanding from the CE for Hamilton Waikato Tourism is that, yes, she did present to the Mayoral Forum in terms of the increased funding proposal and why and so forth. My understanding from her was that the Mayoral Forum received her presentation but made it clear that they were not in a position where they could make any decisions or offer guidance on behalf of their councils in that forum. So
yeah, no, that's exactly how she sort of put it to us, I had thought. But
so I wasn't there when they...
I'm trying to go forward from here. I think there is a case for improved funding, but it's got to be at a level that's manageable for the constituent councils. And I would request maybe, because I think that's a good forum, a small F forum, to have that sort of discussion, that yourself and the CEO sort of initiate some discussion about a level of increase that may be affordable going into the future. And it may not be something we have in this LTP. It might have to come through an annual plan or something like that. I just think that it's almost playing off one council against the other, and you're always going to get one or two that say no. And the proposition that we've got, the situation we've got at the moment, every council's agreed to a per head funding model, roughly per head funding model, and that's good because no one can opt out, has opted out. But
What's
this
the
new
consequences of some of them saying yes and some of them saying no? What's the consequence for the RTO? What does it mean for them?
Your Worship, just on the question of some saying yes and some saying no, in the original paper that we put forward for the LTP, we did recommend yes, but on the basis that every other council comes in. And I think, I don't know the detail of the other councils' decisions, where they've said yes or no, or if there are any conditions or provisos, but I think what's important in all of this is that the integrity of the current partnership between all the councils in terms of the joint funding model that we have with Hamilton Waikato Tourism remain intact, as you know, with this question mark that's in place. So I can't answer that question in terms of...
So, Your Worship, that is why I'm suggesting that it be a jointly worked out proposition led by the mayors and CEOs, if there is to be anyone at all. If someone says, no, we're not willing to give a cent extra ever, then maybe that'll kill it. But if someone says, look, yeah, we could manage a 10%...
One of the difficulties is, I mean, the mayoral form's just a meeting. It's not, it doesn't have any authority, so...
I'm not asking for any authority, I'm asking for a discussion to see if there's a pathway forward that the mayors collectively can identify.
So my understanding from Councillor McPherson's request is to find out what is the maximum they would contribute if they were to contribute anything.
Well, not the maximum, what's an amount that's manageable.
Manageable amount.
I don't think we should put up the most we possibly could, but I think we should consider an increase and try and get buy-in. In principle, then of course it has to go back to constituent councils for approval. You know, that's the approach.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Forsyth next, then I've got Councillor Gallagher, then I've got the Deputy Mayor. So did you have some questions?
Just to the CFO, can you remind me what the quantum is that we have available? Is it 120?
Yeah, the amount of surplus that we have at the moment is estimated at $121,000 in 2016. But again, we have constraint in our debt target in 2021, and that is now only $400,000. So from that point of view, if you would add this, you would actually be exceeding your debt target.
By which year?
By 2021.
Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Gallagher?
You just remind me, we do the 50%. Is that in this area? Is that relative? Is it a population? Is it a population calculator, or how does it work?
Look, I can't recall the exact detail of the calculation. It was done some time ago, but yes, it's to do with the mix of the ratepayer base plus the visitation nights and so forth. So it's a reasonably, I think it's a fairly robust calculation when I looked at it, but I can't recall the detail of it right now.
It just, I'm happy to move or work, second something that Dave might put, Councillor McPherson put up, because it seems to me we do have precedents. If we look at the role of the mayoral forum, as I understand it, I'm crystal clear, mayoral forum have led a number of initiatives. We've looked at the Three Waters, the contracts, the $1 million Waikato spatial plan proposal, which is progressing. So I think probably, given the fact you've already got two TAs who have said no, and this proposal was contingent on everyone buying in or not. So as I understand the proposal, once one local authority said no, the whole thing collapses anyway. And it seems to me for, say, not this coming financial year, but the year after, this could be a body of work that the mayoral forum could look at, and consistent with the other work that they're doing, and look to see if around that mayoral table that there is some agreement as to a funding level. Now that is, like the spatial plan, contingent of the respective mayors coming back and winning support of their respective councils once a proposition has come up. And we've had examples of that, and it's been rigorously debated in here, the spatial plan, the waters, etc., and basically historically all of those have won the day around a funding mix. So it just seems to me, I think Councillor McPherson, given the fact that we've had two vetoes already on the proposal, really, Because basically we're debating something that in terms of, just correct me, Sean, if I'm correct here, it's gone because 2 councillors have now vetoed it.
What we don't know is whether or not those councils would be mindful of revisiting that through their LTP process if Hamilton City Council were, for example, to say yes to the additional funding. Part of the challenge we have is actually the process we have to all go through independently in this, and which I think is quite rightly Councillor McPherson's key issue. So that has been difficult. So what I can't say to you is that if Hamilton said, yes, we will go with the additional funding on the proviso that all other councils come in, I can't say to you that those 2 that have currently indicated no won't necessarily come in.
And then Councillor Forsyth's questions comes back to play in terms of, where do we, in terms of this tight budget,
correct,
find the money for this coming financial year, as Councillor McPherson is trying to give us some kind of journey roadmap, because what we don't want to do in terms of the excellent work of Kerry Galter and her team is just to say to her, no, we're not interested. We want to somehow advance this.
Deputy Mayor?
So questions and comments or?
Questions.
Okay, I was going to try and pick up on Councillor Gallagher's comments. Look, is it correct then that it's business as usual?
Dictionary definition between question and comment, but I understand it's a bit of a free flow, isn't it? Because we just want to make sure we have a useful discussion.
So if I can pick up from where Councillor Gallagher and Councillor McPherson have left, look, there's no question that this organisation, Tourism Waikato Hamilton, has done an absolutely outstanding job. And just last week, the current visitor trends were up, and in quite a significant percentage. And it is about economic development. So in terms of a question, is that if we don't vote this, it's still business as usual, isn't it? All of the councillors have agreed to contribute their existing levels of contribution.
In answer to your question, that is my understanding.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that I think Kerry Galter and her team, for the first time, have given councillors a great deal of confidence in the outcomes. There have been some tremendous outcomes, certainly in the city, but in the region. And I'm shocked, actually, that 2 councillors have actually burst the bubble on tourism. And those are the councils that are in heavy tourism areas. I wonder why we aren't thinking about where Councillor McPherson is coming from. I don't know how we can solve it today. Either we vote yes or no, but there should be some further discussion on it, because the 5 councils need to be locked in to a commitment, whatever that commitment is, to enable the organisation to live within its means that we've defined, or simply say, well, forget about all those extra growth things, we're going to get left behind. And I think that is a worrying situation for this council.
Your Worship, I have an amendment.
There's no motion.
Okay, I have a motion then. And just to test the waters based on that sort of point that the Deputy Mayor made, it would be that the increase to regional tourism funding remain unfunded at present, and that the mayoral forum, and in bracket, including the regional council, be asked to consider a regional approach to an acceptable level of funding increase for Hamilton and Waikato tourism.
I'll second that.
So can I just ask if there is no ability for us to fund this, because we've heard from the CFO we can't actually fund it in the first financial year anyway.
Your Worship, I'm not suggesting...
You can't fund it, it's just you blow your budget. But anyway.
I'm not suggesting... That's the reason I've used the words acceptable level, as an acknowledgement that certainly the whole quantum suggested is too much. And clearly the quantum, for whatever reason, was too much for at least 2 other councils. Whether they'll accept anything or not is something that I'm hoping you and the CEO could explore at the mayoral forum. and see what, I mean, let's find out what
Right.
barriers are.
Okay.
That, you know, I'm not trying to commit us to anything, except to say, is there an increase that will work for everyone, that will help
Yep.
this
All right, no,
area?
that's good, and including the regional council, because of course the regional council have already said no, they're not going to.
But they are in the game of economic development, they keep telling us.
Well, apparently, perhaps a toe in here and a foot in there, and then not.
Yes, well,
Yes.
maybe we can just warm the water up for them a little.
Yes, possibly. Considering that they have the same ratepayer base, I suppose. So is there a seconder for that?
Yes, I'll second that.
Seconded by the Deputy Mayor.
I'd like to signal an amendment as well.
And what's the amendment?
Look, I'm just mindful that the Regional Tourism Office doesn't get any assistance whatsoever, but potentially for 12 months or even further.
They do get...
I mean, extra. The extra.
Right,
that
yeah,
they're
because they
seeking.
currently
Yeah.
get funded.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that we do have a $120,000 excess, albeit not till the 2016 financial year, that that excess be directed to the RTO from 2016 to 2020 inclusive, with the proviso that the 4 other TLAs and the regional partnership.
There's 6, because there's 7 in total.
Oh, 7, okay.
Yeah.
6 others then contribute a pro rata amount.
Could I ask the CFO to confirm the financial impact of that on our debt to revenue ratio?
Pro rata. Pro rata.
Could I just clarify what is referred to as the excess?
Yep. 121, you gave me the figure before, so if we just said 120. I know it's not the 195 that the RTO is seeking, but it's closest we can come to. That's all we've got.
Effectively, if we were to put $120,000 per annum into the RTO, in addition to what we're currently funding, then by the time we get to the cumulative effect in 2021, we would breach our debt cap again.
Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you said that we could.
We have a surplus in balancing the books, which, if you refer to the sheet in front of you, is measured in the middle table in 2016 of 121. But the cumulative effect of 6 years of $120,000 increase, when we have only $432,000 left in 2021,
Right.
in our margin for our debt at this stage,
Yes.
would make that too tight, because you'd have 6 years of increase by that stage.
Okay, can you advise then when we could accommodate, what years we could accommodate that increase until, or is it not possible?
At this stage, you've got $432,000 worth of debt by 2021, so you'd have to proportionally allocate based on that, which would be...
That's excluding interest, you're going to say, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, excluding interest. Effectively around about $45,000 per annum at this stage. And that would leave you no margin in 2021.
So what do you want to do?
Your Worship, I'm wondering if I could just address that, because I absolutely support where Councillor Forsyth's coming from, but because of the unsureness of the figures, and we haven't finished the LTP round, not by a long shot yet, we've got at least 2 more iterations of it to be discussed. Isn't what you're seeking, like how much we could afford, something that the Deputy Mayor, in a sense, and the CEO could, the Mayor and the CEO could take into a discussion with the other councils, knowing where we sit, rather than sort of saying up front that this is ours and challenging the others to come up with the same? I'm just, I agree we should know where we stand and how much we can afford, but if it's dependent on the others, isn't the first thing we need to do to see whether they're on the same page as us?
It's chicken and egg sort of stuff,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
Councillor Forsyth, do you think that you just want to wait, don't move your amendment? Let's go away and see what we come back with, because the figures are still too uncertain, but everyone's heard what you're wanting to do. Would that be a better approach rather than locking it in? Isn't that if I want to be a millionaire, you lock it in? Do you want to phone a friend or pick someone from the audience to help you? Elton Smallman, would you like to help Councillor Forsyth? So I'm asking you, do you want to proceed with your amendment knowing what you've just heard?
That's a good idea. Can we come back after the break? Just have a chat about it.
So it is literally phone a friend.
Phone a friend. You only get to phone one friend.
Okay. All right, so councillors, that is...
Sorry, Your Worship,
helpful?
look, I understand what Margaret's trying to achieve. However, if you go into that situation, what about the other councillors? The other councils that are involved in the funding? There's got to be absolute agreement. I think the organisation, the tourism organisation...
Yeah, look, I think Deputy Mayor, that's exactly what everyone's talking about. So let's adjourn. Let's leave that up on the board. Let's adjourn for our cup of tea, as suggested, because we have got one more item to get through, and I was going to adjourn for a cup of tea anyway. So let's come back at 10 to, quarter to, 10 to.
10 to.
Let's start on the dot at 10 to. And deal with this item, then the living wage, then we've got wheelie bins and a targeted rate for wheelie bins, and then we've got rota cowrie, and then we've got the final resolution for a draft, and it's only a draft, and then we're talking cricket. And the idea is to finish just before lunch.
Thank you.
Or at least that
Get them
lunch.
hiding, eh?